All right, welcome back. Mr. Fred Nzako joins us now. Well, good morning and thank you for joining us today. But having listened to the chairman of INEC speaking about the measures that they put in place to ensure that no matter what you see, the hoopla, the back and forth between political parties, these measures that he announced just before we came back to you, if they are to be in place, the electorate may just have to be rest assured that their vote will count. Does that come across to you as such?
Well, it does, but what is important is what we see on the day of election and not the rhetorics given by anybody. I use the word rhetorics because from experience and Nigerian historical electoral experience, the rhetorics have always been good, but the practice where at the end of the day become short of expectation. What we expect is having done and conducted the elections at various levels. At this point, we expect that whatever INEC says about their preparation should be carried through. Whatever preparation they say they have made should be respected and should be given some teeth. And at the end of the day, we ensure that the credibility of the process is top-notch. So that the credibility of the process is not such that we'll begin to belabor the judiciary to determine who becomes the governor. The process must be one that will throw up the governor at the polling booths by the various people who have come out to cast their votes in Edo State. And judging by the number of people who have collected their PVCs in Edo State, according to the resident electoral commissioner, about over 1.7 million people, we expect that if a credible election is conducted, Edo people have opportunity to decide who becomes their next governor. So,
he mentioned specific processes. One of the specific processes he mentioned is using some electronic devices to transport the results from the voting place to a dedicated portal.
That is what
is that suggesting that we're already transiting into electronic transfer of results?
I want to tell you with due respect that as far back as 2019 election, INEC told Nigerians that that was to be the case. And that was what led to the hoopla and the hula baloo about the issue of INEC server or no INEC server. But let that rest in the history of the past. Let us move forward. We expected that going forward, if INEC chair has said that they will deploy technology in a election, that is very gladdening to the heart of every Nigerian, because we know from experience that the problem with the election does not only reside with the point of voting, it also resides at the point of collation. The collation process is the major process, the major challenge in the electoral process, the collation. So if electronic transmission of results can be done in Edo, I can tell you it will drastically minimize the manipulation that is attendant to electoral collation process. Because what it means is that the time lag of transportation of results, if I use your language, which I like so much, transportation of results, that time frame between the voting point and the collation point is very, very important. That is where manipulation comes in. And if you do manual collation of results, somebody can turn 1 to 7 and turn 7 to 9. It becomes very easy. And because this is a huge, they have to deal with huge documentation, at the end of the day, it becomes easy for the fellow who is entering the results to manipulate the outcome at the end of the day. But if it is electronically transmitted, it works seamlessly. And at that point, it is a case of the computers adding 1 plus 1 to give us 2, and not human beings adding 1 plus 11 to give us 2.
You know, the tricky part about this is the fact that, yes, INEC has introduced some of these measures. In fact, they're tinkering with that public viewing portal for people to view election results. I think it was used in Nasarawa just recently, and it is meant to be used for this election in Edo State, even though it's not quite clear how that will work, or even if that will be used eventually. But people also say that's subject to manipulation, some sort of manipulation. I mean, you have people hacking and what have you. But, you know, I'd like to go back to what you began with. Now, when we asked about INEC's readiness, you said, well, this kind of rhetoric in court is what you have heard time and again. And I wonder, so we seem to get it right on paper. Well, at least when we give, media rounds, we say INEC is ready. INEC is prepared for this election. And what you find on election day is quite different. You've talked about manipulation of collation of results, but is that the only loophole that we have in elections?
Of course, that's not the only loophole, but that is the most critical one. In times past, we used to have challenge of snatching of ballot boxes. That has gone down in history as not coming up again. Because if anybody tries to snatch the ballot box of any polling station, the election of that polling station will be cancelled. So that has been taken care of. Now the thing now snowballed again into the issue of collation. If INEC can handle the issue of collation electronically and ensure that results are transmitted electronically, that will also take care of that. But now the challenge that you talked about the manipulation of, where some people raise the fear that even the process of transmission can also be manipulated. But we know from experience and on record that it is a lot easier to manipulate things using human hands than using the buttons of the computer. Because if INEC can walk their talk and establish such viewing centers where immediately results are arriving, people will be seeing the results on the spot. And as it is coming in, not only that people will be seeing it on the spot, the system will be picking it for storage. So it will minimize manipulation. Much as that is not the only problem. The second problem that INEC must also look into is the issue of voter intimidation. That is not only residing with INEC, that one resides essentially with the security agencies.
Okay, Mrs. Zako, before we get to that security point,
yes.
Now, when, I think in 2015, when there's a certain report that indicated that Professor Jaga achieved, I think, 54% card reader authentication, I think subsequent elections were fairly little short of it. But introducing the Z-pad, which is also part of those measures to improve our voting process, which perhaps will also facilitate that authentication. Are there concerns? Because, there have been certain media reports that indicated that those were being, to some extent, jettisoned or were going to be influenced. But from what he has said now, is there any reason for anyone to doubt that this process may not be as transparent?
Those who know such pessimism are looking at the historical facts. Under Professor Tahiru Jaga, when the electronic means of voting card authentication by use of the card reader was introduced, it recorded about 56%. And in 2019, when we expected that the process must have improved, because technology does not go backward, it goes forward, it recorded a lesser percentage, I think about between 18-20%, which was a far cry from the 54-56% it recorded of authentication success it recorded prior to 2015 and in 2015. Now, in Kogi election, for example, the statistics show that the record of such successful authentication of voters' card by the card reader was abysmally below the poor performance of 2019. That was almost about 8-9%. So if the historical trajectory has shown the continuous slide, negative and downward slide in performance of the card reader, it calls for concern because, like I earlier said, technology does not go backwards, it moves forward. Now, INEC has a huge responsibility to ensure that it stops this backward and downward slide of the performance of the card reader, because the card reader is very, very essential in identifying who the real voter is in terms of the biometrics. Otherwise, it will create very huge problem if you rely only on the voter register, which is manual. The card reader, what it does is to ensure that it gives technological digital bite to whatever you have on ground in the manual register. So that is very important. And if INEC wants to introduce the Z part, which INEC in their own opinion says it will scan the iris, which is an extra biometric authentication of the voter, that is very important. But if eventually the history of this commission after 2015 has been a downward slide in deployment of technology, the commission must walk its talk. And that is why people will not take the rhetorics except if they walk their talk on the day of election.
So you don't subscribe to using voter cards, falling back to just voter cards, because you do know, just like the card readers, some of these devices can fail and flop. So do you subscribe to falling back to just the voter cards and say, well, if you have your voter card, you can vote?
There are 3 steps now. One, the voter register, which must show that the voter who has come to vote is on the voter register. 2, the card reader, which must authenticate the voter's card itself and ensuring that it is not a fake voter's card. You recall that there was some time Alibaba.com said that they had voter's card. They advertised that some people could buy voter's card from their shop, online shop. That happened before 2019 election. So in order to ensure that such fake voter's card are not deployed, that is the job of the card reader, to ensure that the voter's card that was brought by the voter was actually issued by INEC. The third level now is the issue of which they now want to introduce, the use of the Z-pad. But if that Z-pad will introduce confusion, let INEC ensure that they fully deploy the card reader and the use of genuine use of the voters register.
It will be very interesting, Mr. Nzako, to see how
the confusion?
all of this is really going to play out, because, I mean, you said something very, very critical, and I think we need to pay attention to it. At least, INEC needs to pay a lot of attention to that one. If technology does not slide backwards, it slides forward all the time, and we have had negatives in our deployment of technology over time, that will put a big question mark on how up-to-date or how upgradable the equipment we have used is for those elections, as well as the reach of internet integration, across, the areas where these things will be deployed. Well, you are not INEC, so we may not be able to ask you that one. But let me ask you about security. We can't digitize security, can we? We have to be with soldiers on ground, with men on ground, to ensure that this is done. With all of the rhetorics that have gone on as far as elections is concerned, security challenges or security assessment is concerned, are you confident that we're going to have a smooth sail, or is there something the people themselves need to do to ensure that we do not slide into anarchy?
The critical stakeholders in every election are, one, the voters themselves, who will determine willingly and as a matter of importance to conduct free, fair, and credible election, because it is the same people that are used to cause violence and disrupt the system. The second critical stakeholders are INEC, the electoral umpire themselves. And I've always held INEC accountable. I have always held INEC responsible for any challenge in the process of election. The third critical stakeholder in any electoral process in Nigeria are the security operatives, the security agencies, who themselves are to create the safe environment for voters to freely cast their votes without intimidation, without compulsion, and without harassment. That is the aspect of the security that we are talking about. It is the same security that agencies that have the responsibility to ensure that those who intend to create violence are nipped in the bud through their intelligence network and the intelligence gathering prior to the election. So these are facts that are on ground. Now, if the security agencies themselves play by the rules set by government, by INEC, I do not think we'll have challenges.
Now, still talking about this Z-pad just for a bit more. INEC has this meeting with political parties time and again. If there are any misgivings or any loopholes, parties are expected to raise it. With the introduction of this Z-pad, because, there's been a lot of talk about the AFIS, finger identification system, which is supposed to improve. If they're introducing Z-pad only to snap the result sheet and then transmit to whatever stages before the results are announced, we also do expect that it should be used to complement the finger identification system or the card readers. So that way, you will not have anyone who has warehouse card readers or voter cards come in and make use of them. So if there was a loophole there, shouldn't the parties be speaking up about that? If we haven't heard INEC say that is what is also going to be useful, because it has two legs to using the ZPAD.
Yes, there are two legs to using the ZPAD, but what is important, I keep saying it, and I earlier said that, is that INEC said they have experimented the use of ZPAD in Nasarawa by election. Well, that is a section of the state. Now they are doing election in the entire state. They have not reported how reliable the use of the ZPAD is with respect to biometrics. The ZPAD can be very reliable with respect to transmission of results. If INEC can separate and do what we call division of labor in economics, let the card reader handle the issue of biometrics, and let the ZPAD handle the issue of transmission of results. Because the experience we had in 2019 was that there was a claim that the card reader could not transmit the result. There cannot be a similar claim now with respect to ZPAD. So if INEC is introducing the ZPAD, they should not model up and complicate the use of both functions. Because don't forget that the ad hoc staff that are going to use these electronic gadgets and devices may not have received adequate training in the use of both. So if you separate the functions of both technological devices, it makes it seamless and easy for them to use. Let one handle authentication. I believe that, in all honesty, if the card reader is deployed alongside the voters register itself, that will help and handle the issue of authentication of the voter. And let the ZPAD handle that major challenge of result transmission.
Mr. Nzako, there's something interesting in what you've just said now, and I'd like some clarification from your understanding. The smart card reader is to be used at that point. So already it's been programmed to be able to read some data, so it's domesticated on the device. But the ZPAD is to transmit results from one place to another remote location. That would require some internet integration. So if there is insufficient internet connectivity in that location, what happens?
I know that from experience. If the smart card reader malfunctions, they rely on the incident form to authenticate the voter and then allow the voter.
No, I don't have a problem.
No,
I'm
coming. I'm building up to that. If the ZPAD itself malfunctions, the information in the card reader can be a secondary backup for whatever information that the ZPAD was supposed to transmit. It cannot fail in all polling centers. It cannot. If it fails in a few polling centers, they can now cross-check the information there with what is stored in the card reader. So they will play complementary roles between the ZPAD and the card reader itself. What is important is that authentic result is what is worked on.
Yeah, but before the results, there has to be voting first.
Yes, there has to be voting
before
first.
their results.
Yes, and that is what the card reader will handle.
Yeah, but last time there were those who complained about that voting process, saying even that there were manipulations as to the incident forms, and so it didn't add up. We've seen that in several litigations, and so shouldn't, because, I mean, they also said that they had actually trained persons, core members, who were also going to be performing the second function of the ZPAD, which is to complement the card reading and finger authentication process, because he has that facility if you can take your iris.
Let me tell you, Chamberlain, these are man-made manipulations and not failure of digital technology. For example, when a supervising polling officer, an SPO, has an ulterior motive of manipulating the process, it starts from even distribution of sensitive materials. That is where you see, like we had in at some time, that elections meant for one local government, ballot materials meant for one local government, is seen in another government. These are man-made intentional manipulation. And if the SPOs themselves do not succumb to such manipulation by the antics of politicians, and if the polling officers themselves are well tutored to handle these issues, these are not illiterates. That is why the minimum standard in selection of a polling officer is a youth corper who is already a graduate. A lot of them are drawn from agencies of government as workers and civil servants. So none of them is illiterate. And these are people that use mobile phones and other tabs and the rest of them on their own. These are people that do transactions online with their banks and the rest of them. So nobody can tell me that they have a crop of people who cannot use the technology. What challenge we have is intentional human manipulation of the system.
Are you saying that there's a possibility that politicians might influence SPOs? Is that even possible?
Oh, that is not possibility. There's a historical fact, huge antecedents, that politicians would like to influence who becomes the SPOs. They would like to submit names of SPOs to INEC for appointment. That is where INEC must not succumb to the antics of politicians. And because the SPO is the head of that organ, in that microcosm of the process, in which case, whatever order he gives is what is followed by the presiding officers and the polling agents and the rest of them. So when the politicians try to influence who becomes the SPO based on primordial and the other political affiliation, you can now see that INEC has started getting it wrongly. So INEC has another task to ensure that they do not allow politicians to influence who becomes the SPOs.
That'll be a big one, and we're hoping that even as their tenures, the tenure of some of those key INEC officials last November, it won't skew judgment or affect anything. But we do thank you for your thoughts this morning, Mr. Fred Nzako.
Gentlemen, well, before I go, very shortly, very quickly, if the key officers of this election tenure is going by November, INEC has a responsibility to let Nigerians to conduct credible election in Nigeria. Otherwise, it becomes an issue of usage of their position to influence one or two opinions.
All right.